Oh, it says webinar stream is now streaming.
It says we're live.
It does. Let's see if I can see it on Facebook. Nope. Oh, yeah, there we are. Awesome. Okay. We are live. I'm going to make that window bigger so I can see. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm going to turn this to speaker view just for a second. For those of you who don't know, my name is Brock Armstrong. And for those of you who do know, you may not recognize my face, but you may recognize my voice as the sidekick co-host of the Ben Greenfield Fitness question and answer podcast. And now and then you're going to see me more often popping up on these Facebook Lives here and talking to some interesting people, answering some questions and all of that kind of stuff. So today, speaking of interesting people, I'm going to put it back into gallery view here so you can see the interesting person that is with me right now. And the guy over on the other side of the screen is Dr. Dan Stickler, and he is the co-founder and chief medical officer at Apeiron. Is that how you say it? Apeiron? Apeiron. All right. I'm Canadian, so I always try to pronounce everything fancy in French. So Apeiron Center. And Dr. Stickler is the visionary pioneer behind the human potential medicine movement. He's a physician to high-performing entrepreneurs who want to optimize their superhuman capabilities. I love that it says superhuman. Anything that's superhuman, how can you argue with that? Dan's also an author, a speaker, a blogger, and a host of the weekly internet radio show and podcast called The Iron Man Executive. That's, again, good name. Dr. Stickler is an expert in the use of genetics and epigenetics in clinical practice and trains healthcare clinicians from all over the world. And you are also the medical director at the Neurohacker Collective. Is that right?
I am.
Yeah. You're the medical director. Oh, you're the chief medical officer at one place and the medical director at another. You've got some good titles. So what we're going to do today is all you folks who are tuning in on Facebook Live, we're going to answer some questions for you. And one of the things that Dan asked me to point out was that he's not allowed to provide any medical advice, so don't ask any crazy medical questions. You can try, but he probably won't answer them because you'd get in some big trouble. This is totally educational and entertainment purposes only. He can not provide dosage or guidance or recommendations on anything that has not been approved by the FDA, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen. You all out there don't have to know what the FDA has approved and not approved. And of course, he cannot address prescription medication questions at all. But one of the things that he can discuss and that we're really hoping to dive deep into is a thing called qualia. And qualia is available for the first time over at Greenfield Fitness Systems, and you can find it by going to bengreenfieldfitness.com/qualia. And in case you don't know how to spell qualia, it's Qualia. And I'm going to copy and paste that URL into the Facebook chat. Oops, that's not it. There we go. So you can find it. And there's some discount codes, but you have to stick around to the end to find out what the discount codes are. So, all right, people. Do we have any good questions? Oh, Eric is asking a question about a stretch for shoulder impingement. Is that something that you feel comfortable talking about?
A stretch for shoulder impingement?
Yes. Maybe that's a little off topic.
Yeah, we have a human movement coach at the center that kind of handles that stuff for us. So I don't really have expertise specifically in that area.
Yeah, I think we're going to stick to things like. Actually, why don't I throw over to you? You can let people know what your area of expertise really is.
Well, one of the things that we focus on is cognitive optimization. We've worked with entrepreneurs and executives for quite a long time in this realm. I mean, in our clinic, we actually do full QEEG brain mapping. We do psychophysiologic stress profiles. We do cognitive testing. So we look at cognitive performance And with that, we do a lot of interventions, and we measure outcomes specifically for that, depending on what the individual is looking for. And that's really kind of what got me attracted towards Qualia in the first place, which was we'd been using a lot of cognitive enhancers over the years, things like Onnit and Siltep and some of the racetams and things like that. And we generally saw probably 50% of people would say, I'm getting a really positive response. And another 50% would say, I really didn't feel anything. And a few you had that would have negative responses. But the Qualia product, after it came out, I had somebody email me, one of my clients, and asked me about it. And I'd never heard of it. So I looked it up and I was like, wow, it looks like it's a pretty comprehensive product. And so she went ahead and started taking it and had raved reviews about it. So I started recommending it to some other clients to try. I still hadn't tried it at that point. And the weirdest thing happened. We were seeing every client was reporting a positive outcome. And that was just not something we'd seen before. So I ended up reaching out to Neurohacker Collective. And I said, I'd like to talk to somebody who is part of this formulation, one of the science people on the team. And they actually set me up with Daniel Schmachtenberger, who's a co-founder. And apparently he was head of research and development. It was actually his brainchild, this whole Qualia product. Yeah, it was really cool. And so I had him on my podcast and I interviewed him, and we just had an amazing conversation, and was really thrilled about it. And then I guess about a month later, and I'd done an entire course on nootropics for Udemy. I've since taken it down from Udemy, and it's on a private host now. But it was a basic course on nootropics and how to get started and what each of them really does and all of this. And Daniel reached back out to me about a month later and said, hey, we're looking for a medical director, and you seem to understand nootropics and cognitive enhancement pretty well. We'd like to have you as our medical director. And I was thrilled to come on board with it. I had a lot of stuff on my plate at the time, but this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. It was just a really great company, and their product is just outstanding.
That's perfect. Thank you. That was very, very good little history there. And it actually spurred a bunch of people on Facebook to start asking some questions. So
good.
Okay. I was coming up with my own questions there. And I do want to ask one of my questions. When you were talking about things like Siltep and the Onnit product, what's it called? Alpha Brain? Is that the one? I've tried both of those, and one of them, I feel pretty good during the day, but then I feel terrible in the evening. And the other one is sort of the opposite, as like at the onset, it sort of feels like a little too much caffeine or something like that. But then by the end of the day, it sort of eases off and I feel a little bit better. Is there something that is particular in our genetics, in our gut bacteria? What is it that makes it so variable and works so differently with different people?
Well, and that's what we found when we use genetics and epigenetics. I mean, we actually look at over 500 genetic variations with each of our clients. And one of the major areas we look at is neurotransmitters. And so we look at how people, the production of dopamine, the breakdown of dopamine, the dopamine receptors, the serotonin, the GABA. We're looking at all of these interactions in the brain, and we're getting ideas of what kind of pieces work well for some and won't work well for others. And that's why you can't take, we've got this tendency to take a product and say, oh, wow, this is a supplement that works really well for focus, and this one works really well for learning. So if I take the two, then I'm going to get good focus and good learning, and it doesn't work that way. Qualia, the one thing that I was so impressed with when I started talking with them was they actually took a whole systems-based approach to the product. And they're the first company that I have encountered that has done that. And what I mean by that is you look at the product and you say, okay, I would like to have better overall function of all the brain processes. The idea is not so much, oh, well, I want to have laser sharp focus, but, forget about the fact that I'm going to lose my stress response. you don't want to do that. You're after kind of this overall picture of optimization. So what they did with the qualia product, which was interesting because I'd never seen it done before, is they took the basis of the brain and they said, okay, let's just provide everything the brain needs in order to optimize. Well, if you're going to upregulate, say, acetylcholine production in the brain, so you're upregulating activity, you want to upregulate dopamine, you've got to remember there's pieces of that have to be supported. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you may upregulate dopamine, but if you don't have all the precursors for the production of dopamine, you're going to run out pretty quick. And then you've got to look at, do I have enough blood supply to maintain the upregulation of metabolism? So you've got to add a product that really will boost metabolism. And then you may get some damaging byproducts. So you've got to look at things that are going to work on neuroantioxidants and the stress response system in the brain. So they took that whole picture of it and they looked at how every one of the 42 different ingredients interact with each other. And that's what just blew me away by it, because I'd never seen an approach like this before. And the killer thing was it really worked. I mean, I was blown away by it. I mean, we did QEEG brain mapping on people before and after, and we saw responses in 4 hours. This wasn't something that, we expected to take it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then you see these changes. Well, we measured brainwave patterns at 4 hours after the first dose and before the first dose, and then 4 hours after, and then 30 days later. And we saw persistence of the beneficial effects, which, it was what we were seeing from the subjective reports. But now we had objective data, and, granted, it wasn't a controlled trial or anything like that, but it was pretty good pilot data to look at and say, wow, we're seeing improvements in all of these areas. And we did cognitive performance scoring, and we did psychophysiologic stress profiles. So we had some pretty good ideas of what was happening with it.
That's really cool. And I've got so many questions from everything that you just said, but we promised the people on Facebook that we'd answer their questions. So I'm going to dive into theirs. And actually, I think there's a good question right here from Claire that'll actually tie in really well with what you were just talking about. She said, I've been taking qualia for more than 6 months, 4 or 5 times a week. I like it a lot. On the other 2 to 3 days, I take Siltep, Alpha Brain, and Neuromaster. Is this okay?
Well, the question I would ask is, does it work? And, that's the biggest thing. I can look at things and say, well, yes or no, it's not okay, or it is okay. But the best response is, is it working for you? If it's working for you, then it's fine. It's great. I mean, if you've been doing this for 6 months, obviously it's having some kind of a positive effect. When I look at people trialing or biohacking with something like that, you want to try to establish a baseline and then a way to reassess. So I always like to do cognitive performance testing. We can do, stress response lab work. It depends on what your outcome is. If you want better stress management, do you want better focus and concentration? Well, look at your productivity. Look at your daily productivity. Look at your sleep with a quantified self device. Those are things that we can actually look at and have some objective data, because it's really easy to convince ourselves that something's working or it's not working from a subjective standpoint. So when I'm working with a client, that's the one thing I'll say. I'll say, what is your goal? How are we going to measure that? Is there a way to get us into a point where we can measure the before or the baseline and measure that again, say 30 days later, to see if we're actually achieving what we're wanting to achieve? And this is the whole use of the biometric data that we have. And I mean, it can be something simple. Look at heart rate variability, get something that measures heart rate variability and see how that changes over a 30-day period. Look at your sleep patterns, see how the sleep patterns change over a 30-day period when you're doing something and when you haven't done something. So I always like to look at that and, understanding she's asking about not taking the days off. I think days off are kind of essential for the brain. It's just like exercise. neuroplasticity is no different than muscle plasticity. So, you want the benefits of exercise, but you've got to have down days on this too. So I prefer personally, when I take Qualia on the 5 days on, I definitely take my 2 days off. And with a lot of these things, the longer you maintain on a continuous stimulation pattern, the more the brain's going to adjust to a new homeostatic state and say, you know what, I'm not getting benefit anymore. So taking those days off is highly beneficial. When I take days off of Qualia, I don't notice it, but I notice it when I start the next dose schedule. So I don't really pay attention to it on my off days, but as soon as I start back, I do notice a difference.
Interesting. That makes total sense. All right. That was a good answer for Claire. Let's, Debbie actually jumped in there. First off, this isn't really a question, but I think I know what she's getting at. She says, those capsules are huge in all caps and they're really expensive. And then she also asked if they're back in stock September 8th. They're back in stock right now, Debbie. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/qualia, you can order it right now. There's no waiting, but the capsules are huge.
Yeah. And
why do they need to be so huge? I'm sure there's a reason. This
is another amazing aspect of what I found with the Qualia product was, I feel like I'm a commercial here too, but it's truly something I'm passionate about. And I was developing a nootropic powder. So I was developing a powder because I did not want to take a bunch of capsules. And I sent it off to 3 different flavor houses. The last one was the top flavor house in the country who said, we have never not been able to flavor something. And they sent back my $5,000 a couple of weeks later. And they said,
is that because it just tasted so bad to begin with? They couldn't cover it up?
Well, what's interesting is I had there were 12 different pieces to that. I had things like lion's mane mushroom and bacopa monnieri and things like that, things that are in Qualia, which was interesting to me. And this was 3 years ago that I went down this road. And I said, I don't want to take a lot of capsules. I mean, that was my whole goal, was to minimize capsules. That's why I wanted it as a powder that you could mix with something. And then here comes Qualia, and I'm looking at him going, wow, 9 capsules a day, and they're huge. But what I found was when I looked at the ingredients and I looked at the dosages that were used, they were pretty consistent with the research data, which you don't find too often because a lot of the ingredients in Qualia are expensive ingredients. And I know for a fact, what they're spending on these things, and they're not getting cheap product. I mean, it's all organically sourced. It's good quality product, and they're paying a lot for it, but they're also putting in, like in choline, people tend to dilute things out with choline bitartrate or use predominantly CDP choline and not alpha GPC because of cost issues. So there's a lot of cost differences that you get when you're creating these products, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on the acetyl-CoA or the acetyl carnitine, something like that, which can be kind of pricey. And they went ahead and they went full bore on it because, you look at it and you're like $150 for a month's supply of this stuff is a lot. But if you tried to buy those individual products at those dosages, and I think somebody actually did that. Somebody posted a video of them buying the different pieces of it, and it cost them more than what the product would cost.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a video on YouTube of a guy who actually did that, and he found that it was more expensive to buy the individual products. But yeah, the capsules are big, and not everybody needs to take that many, though. We have people in my clinic when I'm working with a client, I have them adjust the dosages to an ideal dosage for themselves. Not only, and it doesn't have anything to do with size. It doesn't mean just because you're, a 240 pound man versus, a 110 pound female. I've still seen 110 pound females that were taking the 9 capsules a day. And I've seen a 240 pound male that would take 2 and 3. So they would take 5 capsules a day. I actually had one client that couldn't swallow pills. She was 67 years old, and she'd never been able to swallow a pill in her entire life. And she was actually opening the capsules, pouring them in her mouth, and drinking to wash it down really quick. And she said it tasted like horse manure. But she did it because she got such a positive response. And then for the first time in her life, she learned to take capsules.
I bet you don't want to be taking horse manure. That's hilarious.
No. But yeah, I mean, it is big, but it's because it's required in order to get the product at that level.
Fair enough. All right, let's because you did mention that you're starting to feel like a commercial. Let's branch off of Qualia just for a second. And Nikita asked, when is the best time of day to take lion's mane and reishi? Any other nootropic plants and mushrooms to take for concentration during the day?
It depends on your reaction to them. With lion's mane, you're going to be working with a little bit of GABA stimulation. So, for me, I kind of see how people do with it. If you're using it to buffer the stimulant effects of other sources, then you want to probably take it in the daytime. If you're taking it to assist with sleep and neuroplasticity, probably the nighttime would be better. So it really depends on the goal and what you're looking at with interactions of the other things that you're using it for. So really, again, taking a look at the whole systems approach rather than looking at, oh, this does this, so I'm going to take this. You want to look at outcomes that you're trying to achieve and how you can best achieve those with the interactions of the other stuff.
That makes sense. So really just try them out, figure out what the effect is or the most acute effect is on yourself. And whether or not that I guess lines up with what you're hoping to get from the product.
Exactly.
And then take it at that time of day. So we really are just, a lot of this comes down to experiment on yourself, really, that N=1 experiment that biohackers always talk about.
It really does. I mean, when I look at lion's mane, I have some people that, they'll take 500 once a day and they'll take it in the evening. And then I'll have other people that'll take 1,000 twice a day. And then I have somebody else who takes it in the morning with another stack. But it all depends on the outcome that they're trying to achieve. I mean, lion's mane, generally, you're not going to get much of an acute response from it. You get a little bit of a buffering response with the GABA from too much overstimulation. But lion's mane, predominantly what you're looking at is for neuroprotection, for enhanced myelination of neurons, that kind of stuff when you're taking the lion's mane. So what I recommend people to do is to really sit down and figure out what their goals are. And then you work backwards from that to say, okay, what do I need to utilize in order to achieve that? And how am I going to measure it?
Now, is this the kind of thing that people can hire you to help them with? Is that something that you do with your clients?
They can, but I typically work with people that are really looking to accelerate their optimization. The reason my podcast is called The Iron Man Executive is because somebody referred to me as being like Tony Stark about, that enhanced superhuman merging of technology and the science and medicine that we have now is available for optimization, but it's still relegated to a disease model. So people that really want to take things to a new level. I mean, my initial intake is 16 hours with a new client. So wow. It's pretty intensive. And about 6 hours of that is one-on-one with me. And then I do 30-minute coaching calls once a month with every client. Now, we do have epigenetic coaches out there that have trained through the Apeiron Academy. And with those, they do a lot of what we do, but it's kind of a non-medical version of it. They just work with lifestyle, supplementation, that kind of stuff for enhancement.
Gotcha. All right. Well, speaking of optimal mental health, Gray asked for the top things that you should do or not do for optimal mental health and health in general. That's a big question.
That's a broad question.
That's easy.
But it's a good question. I like it. Yeah, I like the thinking there.
Come on, we've got 7 minutes. You can answer that.
The big answer there is don't look at the low hanging fruit. You got to look at the entire tree here. And this is that systems-based approach. So when I'm working with a client, I'm looking at multiple areas. I'm looking at sleep. I'm looking at stress. I'm looking at nutrition. I'm looking at human movement and exercise. I'm looking at cognitive function and thought processing. I'm looking at the environment that they interact in. All of this stuff goes into that optimized outcome. It's not a matter of looking at one thing and saying, oh, this is going to fix it. It's like saying, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to exercise and diet. It's not going to work if your stress is off, if your sleep is off. So we usually start off with low-hanging fruit as the primary thing, which is sleep, because you want optimal cognitive enhancement. Get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep. That's the first thing I will tell everybody. I mean, that is the one thing that has such a huge impact on our genetic expression, that epigenetics piece of it. When you're under your required sleeping time, you are not giving yourself the opportunity to become optimized. So we work with sleep. We work with stress response. We don't look at stress as a bad thing, but we look at stress as you want to have control over the physiologic response that it creates, because stress is a good thing. We thrive in stress, but chronic stress, we do not. So if we can take out the physiologic response by taking control over it, then we actually have stress as a positive outcome for us. So it's as simple as that. Eating a good diet, getting plenty of DHA in the diet, the fish oils, looking at your genetic responses to the different things. We have some people that don't have good genetic variants that convert EPA to DHA. So you can eat all this fish and take all this fish oil, but if you don't have enough DHA in that fish oil, you're not going to get adequate amounts of it in the brain. Just simple things like that. Just look at that whole picture rather than focusing on one simple piece that we think is really going to make the difference.
So I have two questions out of that. What do you say to the people who concentrate more on getting better sleep versus more sleep? Do you think that's possible, like to actually condense the amount of sleep and still get that kind of benefit?
That would be more of a.
I'm asking for a friend.
That's a personal, yeah. That's very personal for me. I don't, look at sleep from this standpoint. In all of our hundreds of thousands of years of being Homo sapiens, okay, we've been Homo sapiens for, 80,000 years. Sleep is not a survival benefit. Okay. So the caveman that was sleeping, the longer he slept, the more vulnerable he was, correct?
Oh, okay. I got you. Yeah.
Okay. So you would think that from a evolutionary adaptive standpoint, sleep would have been one of those things that the short sleepers would have had higher survival benefit. And so we gradually would have gotten to the point where we sleep very little. But it's the one thing that has kind of eluded the evolutionary adaptation to what we would think would be beneficial versus what was actually beneficial. So there's a purpose to sleep that we don't quite understand. And there's a lot of theories about why we sleep, but it seems to be really important. And I see very positive outcomes with sleep. I don't see those positive outcomes when people try to hack sleep for shorter sleep. Now there's the gene, the DEC2, which you can look to see. Actually, the new version of 23andMe actually codes for the DEC2 variation. You can look at that, but again, it's about 1% of the population that actually carries the 6-hour sleeping gene. And I can tell you that most people only sleep 6 hours or less right now in the U.S. population. So what I say is plan your sleeping, go to bed at the same time every night. And I know it's hard to do, but get into the habit of that. Don't use an alarm to get up. If you're using an alarm to get up, you are not getting adequate sleep. It's not working for you.
Gotcha. Now, it's my second question from the first round of things, you actually sort of got into a little bit there. I was going to ask, do you have a genetic test that you recommend that you think is maybe more beneficial than some of the others? Is 23andMe the one that you default to?
Well, here's the thing about the genetic testing. Direct-to-consumer genetic testing is not much value without somebody who understands how to interpret it.
Yeah.
We look at genes as mutations, and I can tell you that anybody that calls them a mutation, if they're a researcher calling them a mutation, they're trying to make headlines. If they are a health blogger that's referring to them as a mutation, they tend to be trying to sell something. It's genetic variants. These are polymorphisms. So they're occurring. It's like MTHFR. Everybody freaks out over the MTHFR homozygous risk for 677T. Well, in certain environments, there is actually survival benefit for having the homozygous recessive. So in a folate-rich environment, fetuses that carry the homozygous recessive have higher survival rates. Yeah, the people in a folate-rich environment have lower colon cancer rates with the MTHFR 677T homozygous. So when we look at this, we need to understand that our genes, these polymorphisms of our genes, are not mutations, but they're adaptive alleles that occurred in response to environment. Well, the problem is we've moved out of the environment. So ApoE4, which is going to increase risk of Alzheimer's disease with a high saturated fat diet, was highly beneficial in a African population where it's highly protective against pathogenic infections and organisms. But there's not exposure to a lot of saturated fat in the diet. Now, you transfer that gene into the North American dietary pattern, and suddenly the benefits aren't there. So what we do is we coach our clients to kind of adjust their environment, their lifestyle, to adapt to some of these maladapted genes or these alleles that are mismatched to the environment. So just making these tweaks into those genes can generate positive outcomes for people down the road. And people look at genetic data and they think they can get a direct to consumer report that says, oh, it says I'm a power lifter, I'm a power athlete, and I need to eat this diet in order to lose weight. But what we've found is that those are pretty far off, and it doesn't take into account epigenetics. So even though this genetic data we're looking at is looking at the hardware of the computer. So if you look at your computer and you can understand you have a hard disk and you have this and you have this and you have this, it doesn't tell you how that functions. The software that's loaded on there is the epigenetics. So how is that hardware actually expressed is controlled through the software. And that's what we actually have control over. That's our ability to control our destiny in that regard.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, but it's kind of a bummer because you really do I just want somebody to give me that final report that'll tell me.
Well, and that's what we train clinicians and coaches in. We have physicians, chiropractors, dietitians, personal trainers, health coaches, all training in the same environment with the Apeiron Academy. And what we train this model. We have our own proprietary genetic templates, and we look at 500 different genes when it comes to nutrition, exercise, supplementation, all of this. But nobody has access to those except the certified coaches, because you can't adequately give somebody this report and say, here's your report, and I don't know how to interpret it. You have to be able to interpret it based on what you're seeing in there and how you interact with that person. So we have epigenetic coaches all over the United States. We've trained some in Australia and Netherlands and Ireland that actually are trained to do these interpretations.
Well, that is a perfect place to wrap up. We've gone just over a half an hour, but before we go, can you let everybody know where's the best place to find you, to find your podcast, all of that kind of stuff?
Well, the podcast and our medical center can be found at apeironcenter.com. That's APEIRON center.com. And our online training academy, and we also do live events, is at apeiron.academy, not a .com, but .academy. And just to let you know, Apeiron is actually Greek for limitless.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And where you guys in specific, the fans of Ben Greenfield Fitness, can find Dan is next week. He's actually going to be making a special appearance in the Inner Circle. And you can find out about the Inner Circle at innercircle.bengreenfieldfitness.com and go and sign up there if you haven't signed up yet. And Dan's going to come on and do an even deeper dive into all the stuff that he knows and is a amazing specialist in. And I did promise that I would give you a discount code to buy some qualia from bengreenfieldfitness.com/qualia. And That 15% discount code is, imagine this, Qualia15. So Qualia, we're so inventive. Qualia 15, and that's just for a single dose. And if you want to do the recurring orders, it's Qualia 15 with an S. I made that sound like a Z. It's an S. So Qualia 15S. And that's at bengreenfieldfitness.com/Qualia. Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. It was great having you on. It was great to talk to you. I think the audience enjoyed getting some of their questions answered. We actually had quite a few people on while we were having this call. So a lot of people were soaking up the knowledge. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right. I'm going to hit end on this broadcast. Oh, people are saying thank you. Eric says thank you. Debbie says thank you. And no, Debbie, you cannot use that coupon code through Amazon, only through Ben Greenfield Fitness. All right, everybody. Thank you. And we'll see you all again. If I can figure out how to stop the live stream. There we go. Bye-bye.